I'm going to share with you a little story today about me, about my life, and about chronic fatigue. I've got this picture up here. This picture is really significant to me because this was taken only about a year and a half ago on a beach in Costa Rica. And the reason it's so significant, you'll see by the end of this talk, but this was a day in which I managed to surf 8 hours. And I'm an avid surfer. I love to surf. And this was something I never ever thought would be possible when I look back at my life about 6 to 8 years before that, because of the health experience that I went through. So I always like to start the talk with this because this is a really positive moment that I want to share, and I'm going to end up coming back to this point. A little bit about me and my background. I did my PhD in medicinal chemistry. So I'm a scientist. I'm very scientific and rational about the way that I do things. And it's quite funny because people often say, well, what are you doing working in natural health? And hopefully by the end of this talk, I will explain that journey. But the way that I've approached health traditionally was through the scientific method. And I always believe that when we have a health problem in our life, we come to a crossroads. And for me, the crossroads used to really only be one road, and that road was the Western health system. So when we're faced with a health problem, we always have this question of, where do I go? Do we head down this Western health route? Do we go see our doctor? Do we rely on what they tell us? And do we go through that health process to try and find a solution? Or do we take the right-hand turn and we look at an alternative solution to natural health? And I am a firm believer that the only thing worse than an arrogant doctor who thinks he has all the answers is an arrogant hippie who thinks they have more answers. And this is the way my philosophy about health. I think we need to find a balance between natural health and Western medicine. And this is what we do as a company and what I do as a professional. So I used to think that science and technology were the foundation of medicine, and that surely all the research and all that information that we have on health will be able to help us when we're struggling with our health. And I had a real wake-up call with this, because when I was in my 20s, I had to ask myself, well, what happens when science doesn't have the answers for us? So my health journey, I was a high achiever, I was a perfectionist, I was one of these people that we would say, well, I would say now is high risk for a chronic condition like chronic fatigue. I was working in my honours year at Victoria University of Wellington. I was probably doing 80 hours a week in the laboratory. I think my lowest grade at university was an A, and I was studying to get a scholarship to go into medicine. And then along with this, you have all of these other stresses that a normal 20-year-old would have. You know, you've got expectations. Poor diet was a big part of that process. I used to eat a lot of crap food when I was a student. Baked beans was a staple diet for me because of money and because of time. You've got academic stress, chemical stresses. I drank a little bit, you know, I would go out and have a good time. You've got relationship stress, sleep deprivation. And this all came to a pinnacle one day when I just collapsed, literally, physically collapsed, and had to be taken to hospital. So I've got some wonderful photos of this journey. This was one of the many trips that I made over the next 2 years to the hospital. And I was, same process every time, where you're put on a drip, you get stabilized, they find there's nothing wrong with you, and then they send you home. And over the next 3 months beyond this is what happened to me. So this is a lovely photo of me, a little selfie I took of some of the rashes that I used to get. My body used to come out in these hives, these autoimmune rashes. And this would just be from overexertion, from eating the wrong food, or for just basically, I think I used to say I was allergic to life. Everything set me off. And I was really sick. I had extreme fatigue. My immune system crashed. I had shingles. At the age of 20 is very unusual to get. I had toxoplasmosis to the point where I almost lost my eyesight at one point. I had chronic muscular pain, joint pain. I think after about 20 minutes on a computer, I would have to rest before I would collapse. I had seizures, so a lot of sort of convulsive seizures, migraines, dizziness, insomnia. It would be near impossible to get to sleep, but then I would wake up and feel like I hadn't slept at all. These are some of the things. Colds and flus are a really big problem. So I probably would get a flu every 2 to 3 weeks. And I became paranoid of germs. And anyone who was sick, I couldn't be in a room with them. And the problem was that when people said to me, oh, just don't be so stupid, deal with it, get over it. I would listen to that advice, and then I would hang out around these people, and then I would get sick, just like I thought I was going to get sick. So it was really frustrating. I had a lot of gastrointestinal problems. And I went to the doctor, obviously, for all of this. And then the doctor put me through the protocol. In terms of how it feels, because has anyone in this room had chronic fatigue? Has chronic fatigue or knows someone with chronic fatigue? So you'll be familiar with this. I always say, imagine how you feel when you've been struck by the most severe flu of your life. You feel like you've been hit by a bus. Stay up all night for 24 hours without sleep, or go to the other side of the world and get severe jet lag. Stand in front of a large audience of hundreds of people and give a talk or a presentation, and then eat some really dodgy curry and combine this all into one. And this is how you feel all day, every day. And the thing is, there's no rest with sleep. You wake up and you feel the same as you did when you go to sleep. And this is what chronic fatigue feels like. It's horrendous. And it doesn't go away. And after 2, 3, 4 months of this, you start to become a little bit depressed. And this is what frustrates me, is then you go see your doctor and he says, well, maybe it was the depression that led to the chronic fatigue. So then this is how the Western system breaks you down. You've got your general practitioner. They send you to your physiotherapist, your dermatologist, because you've obviously got skin rashes that you've got to deal with. They send you to a neurologist because you're getting these seizures. Your neurologist sends you to a cardiologist because you've got issues with your elevation. I went to a sleep clinic. I went to a psychologist, a gastroenterologist, a immunologist. This whole process took about 9 months and hundreds of dollars and waiting lists and waiting lists. And then this is what happens. Your GP gives you a bucket load of blood tests. So I felt like a voodoo doll at one point where I was getting blood tests every week. I was on continual antibiotics and antivirals, antihistamines as well. Physio they put me on anti-inflammatories. They gave me different exercises. My dermatologist gave me antifungal treatment and low-dose prednisone for the skin rashes. My neurologist put me on Imigrin for migraine, and amitriptyline, which is a tricyclic antidepressant to help prevent further migraine. My cardiologist put me on beta blockers because I had tachycardia syndrome. My psychologist gave me Prozac because I got a little bit depressed at this point. And my gastroenterologist sent me for a colonoscopy and put me on omeprazole and said I had possible Crohn's disease. So this whole process was about 9 months. And by the end of it, this is what I had. An arsenal of 11 different drugs. And I had faith in the Western system. So I went home and I started taking all of these things. I said, yay, this is the solution, I'm going to feel better. And guess what? Didn't make it, I won't swear, but it didn't make a bit of difference at all to my health. And it was really frustrating because you'd studied science and medicine and you thought surely there must be an answer to this, there must be a solution. The one good thing about Western medicine for chronic fatigue is you can exclude conditions. So I went through the process of excluding all of these known conditions for fatigue. And then by the end of it, they give you your diagnosis. You have chronic fatigue syndrome. And I said, well, what does that mean? I'm not well and they don't know what's wrong with me. And does it give you any resolution? Do you feel any better at all? Not really, no. All you have is a label. So I feel for people now that have gone through this process, because I went through this process and it took me about a year to get there. And by the time you reach this point, what's your solution? Well, your only solution in my mind is to go back to that crossroads and to take a right-hand turn. And I got so desperate. As a scientist, it was so hard for me, I went to an acupuncturist. And I didn't believe in acupuncture because I thought, how can sticking a needle in you make you feel better? But there was a great quote from Hippocrates, who's the father of modern medicine. And Hippocrates himself, who created modern medicine, even says, foolish the doctor who despises the knowledge acquired by the ancients. And this is the philosophy that I now live by. Because people have been managing health for thousands of years, effectively, and just because we think we have all the answers now because of science, doesn't mean that we know more than them. So what did I do? I went to an acupuncturist. And it was really funny. It was like something off a movie where my acupuncturist sat me down and I went through the whole process of telling him how I was. And he said a little fable to me. He's a little Chinese man. And he said, in ancient China, we had a saying that it's easier to close the door to the stables than it is to chase down the wild horses. Your horses, they ran years ago, and you've got to go and collect them up now. And then he also said that they used to pay the doctor when they were well in the ancient villages, because it's the doctor's job to keep you healthy and keep your health. And I love this philosophy because it's really talking about preventative medicine. And in our culture, we don't look at medicine as a prevention. We look at medicine as an absolute last-ditch solution. And this is the biggest problem with the current way that we're living. So I started getting acupuncture. It was horrendously painful and uncomfortable, but it took about maybe 6 to 8 weeks until I just noticed a little glimpse of feeling slightly better for about 4 or 5 hours in one afternoon when I would normally crash. And this gave me hope, and I thought maybe it's the acupuncture. So I started going frequently, and I ended up going twice a week. And it really started to get the ball rolling a little bit with my health recovery. And this was enough to get me so much hope, because at this point I was at my wit's end. So I ended up throwing all my drugs out, all 11 different combos that I was put on by my doctors. And I started getting into what we call Qi Gong. So Qi Gong is a form of Tai Chi, a very slow form of Tai Chi. I initially tried Tai Chi, but I found that it was too much for my body. And I would overexert myself and I would collapse again. So my acupuncturist said, you got to try Qi Gong. So Qi Gong is a form of an energy art, and it's about building and moving Qi in the body. But it's very meditative. It's very, very static with the way that it works. So for me, I started doing this, and this was my exercise, because I didn't have the energy to exercise properly. I couldn't even walk 100 meters. And it really started to help. It started to help. It was moving my body. It was getting me going again and building up my energy. And then I got into supplements, and I'm going to talk briefly about 2 supplements today that made a big difference to my health. And this is what our company does now, is we specialize in supplements for chronic fatigue. I don't want people to believe that supplements are the solution, because they're not. And I always say this, there's no magic cure for chronic fatigue. And I'm never going to promote a magic cure, because I'm a scientist and I'm rational, and I don't believe that you can answer a condition like chronic fatigue with one thing. I think you need a multifaceted approach. So the ones I want to talk about are GPX and glutathione accelerators, and Peruvian Maca, or what they call endocannabinoid modulators. And I'm going to explain why we do these now based on the science and research behind chronic fatigue in a few slides coming up. So one thing that really helped me at the time was a supplement called Max GXL, and I used to buy this from the US, and it cost me $80 a bottle. It's now about $160 a bottle, because they realize that people want it. And so they jack the price up, and that makes me really annoyed. But basically, the way that it works, I studied my PhD on medicinal chemistry, and I looked at inflammatory processes surrounding some of these chronic conditions. So we used heart disease as a model, as an inflammatory model. But basically in our body, we have 2 forms of antioxidants. So one is from the food that we eat, and this is why we take vitamin C. This is why we're told that green tea is fantastic for our health. And why we take resveratrol. But a lot of people don't realize there is another type of antioxidant in our body that's job is to protect us from oxidative stress. And these are enzymes that our body makes. And these enzymes come in systems. So the role of these enzymes is to protect your body from oxidative stress and disease. And the one that we really focused on was called glutathione peroxidase. And this is an incredible system in your body. Glutathione peroxidase has a key enzyme in it that will detoxify and protect your body from oxidative stress. So for people with chronic inflammatory conditions, it's really important. There's 2 types of inflammation in your body. We have what we call primary inflammation, which is oxidants and free radicals that we get from the environment around us, from the food we eat, and also from internal stress. But then we have what we call secondary inflammation. Secondary inflammation is our autoimmune inflammatory component. So secondary inflammation is when the body is inflamed and it recruits along what we call macrophage cells, our immune system, to that site of inflammation, and that our own immune system begins to attack that inflammation. So this is secondary inflammation. This is autoimmune inflammation. And the way our body naturally protects from this is through these enzyme systems. So I always say that all these food-based antioxidants are fantastic for primary inflammatory conditions. But when we have autoimmune disorders happening in our body, we need to stop and shut down that autoimmune response. And naturally our body does it through enzyme systems. So GPX's role in the body, this enzyme, is to protect from secondary inflammation. And it's very specific. It's specific to tissue throughout the body. So we have 5 types of GPX. One is in our brain, GPX4. We have one that resides in our gastrointestinal system. One is plasma-based and more around the cardiac tissue, and one is in the muscle tissue. And the amazing thing with these enzymes is they recycle themselves. So when you've got an oxidant and an antioxidant, the two will combine, and then they will eliminate from the body. What happens with our enzymes is they will absorb up multiple oxidants, become inactive, and then they will recycle. So I like to think of it like a sponge cleaning up a kitchen bench. A sponge that you can wash and reuse versus single-use paper towels. And these enzymes are incredible, but what happens and we showed this with heart disease. Heart disease is a chronic inflammatory condition of the vascular tissue. The GPX levels deplete over time and become completely obsolete and destroyed. So we call it antioxidant depletion. So we took people with chronic heart disease and we showed that they had no GPX left at all. And the GPX that they had was not active anymore because it had been bombarded with this autoimmune inflammation going on. And what we did was we supplemented these patients. We gave them the building blocks to build their own enzymes, and we gave them the building blocks to build their own cofactors. And we were able to get these systems up and running again and help to reduce down the inflammation. The problem in heart disease is that these people, the heart disease inflammatory component is a lifestyle disease, and they would continue to eat crap, eat their junk food, drink their cola, and then wonder why they weren't improving. So I always say that if you're going to work on any kind of antioxidant therapy, the first place you start with is the diet. If you're not eating the right foods, there's no point taking the supplement. It's not going to be effective. You're just wasting your money. And this is why, as a company, we promote the dietary changes and health aspects first. We don't want to give you a supplement unless you're going to do the groundwork to help your body while you take it. So the GPX supplement that we created was based on what I used to take, this GXL tablet. But it basically works to boost your levels of glutathione peroxidase, and it gives you the cofactors you need to recycle that enzyme more rapidly. And we do it for about maybe 70% less than the bottle that I was buying in the US. And I source all my own materials and I get it manufactured at a GMP facility in Auckland. So this is a supplement that I manufacture purely for people like me with chronic fatigue. And it helped a lot. It helped a lot with my energy, helped a lot with my immune system and my recovery. But again, it's not a magic solution. There's a lot more that you need to do on top of that. The other thing that I talk about is Maca. And this stuff I came across in Peru. So I met my partner Sally when I was in recovery. I told her my story and she said, you need to take Maca. And I'd never heard of this plant, but this plant I think is incredible. Maca contains chemicals called macamides. And these chemicals work with your endocannabinoid system. So this is a whole nother talk I give on Maca, but I'm just going to give you the summary, the 2-minute summary. So the way that Maca works is these bioactives in this plant work with our natural chemical in our brain called anandamide. So anandamide is a natural endocannabinoid that lives in our brain. The job of anandamide is to turn off our stress response. It's a self-regulatory system. So what they've shown is that when you have a stress response in your brain, your anandamide levels come up. So this is a messaging molecule that regulates the stress response. It balances out your serotonin, your hormones. It switches off your adrenal glands. So it's an adaptogen. And it brings your body back to balance. Anandamide then slowly decreases over time. And it's broken down by an enzyme in your body. And they showed that the Incan people who have used this plant to prevent stress diseases and disorders for 2,000 years, what they showed is when they consume maca, it prolongs the lifespan of their anandamide in their brain. So it basically gives your brain a chance to cope better with the stress. And this is how it works in a nutshell. So The endocannabinoid system is our self-regulatory system in the brain. It was only discovered in 1993, and the job of the endocannabinoid system is to regulate all of these conditions. It regulates our sleep cycles, appetite, digestion, hunger, mood, motor control, a whole load of different functions in the body. And the way it does that is through these natural endocannabinoids. So they live between synapses in your brain, and when you have a stress response, they're released. Their job is to regulate that response. So they regulate your, like I said, your neurotransmitters, your serotonin, your melatonin, your hormones, everything. And dysfunction of this system has been linked now to chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, Crohn's disease, all of these chronic inflammatory conditions. The people of Peru who have been consuming this plant for 2,000 years, none of these conditions exist in their population because they take it all throughout life. Their medicine is based on prevention. And I swear I'm going to give this to my children from the age of 5 upwards like they do in Peru, because for me it made a really big difference to my mental health, my mental energy, my focus. It's a natural antidepressant as well. And it can regulate your body. And what I love about Maca is it's cheap. So you don't need to pay like I was paying $300 a month for supplements. This stuff costs $20 a month. And it's affordable for what it can do. So I like to say it's like a switch. The Maca mides in here work like a switch to turn off your stress response. It's awesome for adrenal fatigue. And this is what it can do. These are some of the things. So if you want to know more about Maca, you can come talk to us. But it modulates your stress response. It's fantastic. These are the traditional uses, and the way it's used now is for hormonal imbalances, for mental health imbalances, for fatigue, pain, energy, and memory. And I always say with Maca, you can know if it works for you for about $50 or $60. A couple of months supply and you'll know if it's something that works for you. It won't necessarily work for everyone, but for me it made a really big difference to my health. The other thing that made a big difference to my health was NLP, so neuro-linguistic programming. And I always say for people with chronic fatigue, one of the hardest things is getting rid of the toxic thoughts in your mind. You wake up every day and you have so much fear and phobia based around your condition and your health that you can't function like a normal person. And one of the biggest things that NLP gave me was the ability to try and reprogram my brain, to get rid of this idea that I'm sick, because that's one of the hardest parts of recovery. People that make full recoveries from chronic fatigue do it by starting with their brain first. Once you start changing the way that your brain works and thinks, and you get rid of all of that toxicness in your head, you can really start to bring about positive physical change with your body as well. And I always say you have to stop thinking of chronic fatigue as a curse. It's a curse on your life. It's not a curse on your life. It's an absolute blessing on your life, because once you come through it, every day is special. And that's something that I need to get across to people with chronic fatigue. Once you beat it, you wake up, and it doesn't matter what you're doing that day, you feel fantastic because you have your health and your life back. And everything in the past has got you to that point. And this is a big part of positive change, is changing the way you think. And NLP helped me with that. But the rest of that was my journey that I took. The other one is probiotics. I'm always big on gut health. Gut health is really important, and I'll tell you about this in a second. So this was what I used to take. This is what I take now. I take my Maca for balance and mental health. I take my GPX for energy. I take kombucha regularly, kefir, sauerkraut, all my probiotics, and in winter I'll take a form of antioxidants to help keep my immune system strong. I haven't had a flu or a cold for over 6 years. Touch wood. And this year was particularly bad, and I was around really sick people this year. What else do? I continue to get acupuncture. I practice my energy arts like Tai Chi and Qi Gong. And I think this is really important. Meditation is another great one. And I looked at my diet and changed my diet. I got rid of all the refined foods. I'm on a whole food diet. I still eat meat, and I still enjoy. I used to be intolerant to everything, but now I love treating myself. I go and get pizza and things, and it doesn't kill me like it used to. So that's moderation. But I want to share this with you because this is an awesome article that came out from researchers at Cornell. It was in Microbiome, and there's been 2 studies in the last 2 years that back up what I've talked to you guys about today. And what they showed was they took 38 people with chronic fatigue and 30 people without chronic fatigue. And they were able to diagnose them based on 3 factors, whether they had chronic fatigue or not. So for people that say there's no physiological difference. There's no physiological way to define chronic fatigue. They've been proven wrong. The key differences between people with chronic fatigue and without is that people with chronic fatigue have what we call a pro-inflammatory gut environment. They have chronic gut inflammation. They have what we call microbial translocation, leaky gut, where they're getting bacteria from the gut leaking into the bloodstream, and it gives them an underlying level of immune response, which weakens their immune system. They have plasma-based inflammation based on this microbial translocation. They have a reduced overall gut biodiversity, and then they have an adrenal overload based on the fact that they're chronically in an immune response. And these are the key 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 differences between people with chronic fatigue, and it's been shown clinically now that you can diagnose these people based on these 5 key factors. And they did this. 82% of the time they got it right. And what I love about this study, and there's a new one this year, it's all on our website, we have a blog on there, is that it proves that chronic fatigue is not all in your head. There are physiological differences with people with chronic fatigue. So from this study, you can see all this on our website too. Go to my blog, and we've talked about this study. It's called It's Not All in Your Head, It's in Your Gut. The number one thing that I think these 2 studies have shown over the last year is that chronic fatigue is not psychological. It's not in your head, it's actually in your gut. The biggest differences come from your gut. We now have a way that we can diagnose chronic fatigue with an 82% accuracy based on these markers. The main issues are oxidative stress and inflammation, stemming from the gut dysbiosis, which is an imbalance in gut bacteria, leaky gut, microbial translocation, chronic inflammation, and then adrenal fatigue are the presentations of these people. So by presentations, I mean this is what they present with when they have chronic fatigue. So based on what we know currently on chronic fatigue, and based on what I know from my experience with chronic fatigue, is that when you treat it, you should focus on reducing oxidative stress, so coming about finding a way, an antioxidant therapy that works with your body, balancing your gut bacteria and biome, and supporting your adrenal function. The problem with these studies is we don't know what comes first, chicken or the egg. Is that gut dysbiosis leads to chronic inflammation, which leads to leaky gut, microbial translocation, and then your adrenal glands spark up with that stress response? Or does it begin with the adrenal glands and the chronic stress coming from your mind working its way down, which then causes chronic inflammation, which causes gut dysbiosis, which causes leaky gut? So the answer is we don't know, and we may never know. But all of those factors are linked. And this is the key thing that we see different between people with chronic fatigue and without. So I want to say to people out there with chronic fatigue, it's not in your head. There are reasons why you feel the way that you feel. And there are things that you can do to help yourself. But all of this is a process, and it's a journey that you have to go on. So this is my philosophy. That good health is a never-ending, individualistic, holistic journey. It requires education, engagement, and a little discipline. So we do need to read about things. We do need to get answers. But no one can tell you how to manage your own health. It has to come from you. I can tell you what worked for me. You can try it. But it really is a process. And it's a holistic process that starts in the mind and then works its way through the body. So I think we need to find a balance between science and natural health. We don't promote miracle cures, and we don't promote that science has all the answers. I think you need a bit of holistic management as well. It's not purely about taking a supplement. It's about working with the mind and also working with the spirit. And I like to share this with people because this gives people hope, I hope, that you can make a full recovery from chronic fatigue. There's a video on our website, on my blog. This is a mountain I climbed in Peru this January, 5,300 meters. And when I look back at my experience, I did a little video at the top. It's really hard because there's no oxygen at that altitude, so I was struggling to talk. But for me, it was incredible because to go from the point where I was bedridden for 2 years and I couldn't even walk 100 meters to climb up 5,000 meters in the Andes was the most incredible experience of my life. And it gave me so much perception of where I've come. And I really want to inspire people that anyone can do this with chronic fatigue. It's a process, and you need to go on that journey yourself. And you need to create your own health journey. And I hope that I've been able to inspire you today. We're going to be around at the stall if you want to come talk to us anymore. We have some specials on as well. And if you have any questions, feel free. We've probably got a minute or two to ask any. And thanks so much for your time.